Stonewall is the largest LGBTQ library in the world. We have over 30,000 volumes of books. We have one of the largest nationally collecting archives of our community. So please consider coming to our site in Fort Lauderdale on Sunrise Boulevard for a tour of the facility. We also have up right now our Pride exhibit, which is 55 years of Pride. So it's video of everything from the first Pride all the way to 2025. You walk into our theater, you sit down, and then you're surrounded by prides from all over the world, including places that no longer have Pride because being LGBTQ could be a death sentence. So it's really amazing to watch the transitions that have gone on in our community, the positives, the negatives, but what's most exciting and inspiring is how not only we overcome, but when we face obstacles, we end up stronger on the other side. Whether it's marriage, whether it's AIDS, whether it's adoption or housing or job protections, we have always come out better on the other side. And this case of what we're going through now with the attacks, with the unfathomable banning of books, with the erasure of history, we will survive, we will prosper, and we will come out ahead. So thank you all for being here and remembering that our community is unique in the sense that it is representative of all the other communities in the world. There is not one place on earth where you will not find us. And in all those places, regardless of race, creed, color, religion, nationality, or ethnicity, we are there. So when we talk about the children of the rainbow, that's us. And we have a special responsibility, therefore, to be a positive force, to be unifiers rather than dividers. We all know about the dividers. Well, you're looking at all the people who are unifying the people of the world, so we will make it a better place. So, tonight we're going to talk with Jonathan Capehart, editorial writer, news anchor, and his book. And his book, you want to hold that up for a second? That's his book. And I sat down to read it, and I really didn't know all that much about his private life, although I've been stalking him for years. Well, I told him today we lived in adjacent buildings on M Street in Washington, D.C. And my family was still living in New York, and he was going back and forth to New York. So on Sunday nights, we were on the same train coming back to Washington. And being that we lived a building apart, we were also on the same metro from the station. And we took the same escalator. So he had no idea who I was, but I knew who he was. And the only time he acknowledged me in the year or 2 years that we did this was I tripped on the escalator, and he came over and helped me back up. So he is quite the gentleman. So with that, we will get into a discussion about this book. He is now currently editing it, if you're not paying attention. He said, oh, not that word. So, with all that you have done, why now to write a memoir?
Well, first of all, Robert, I'm glad I saved your life on the escalator. In all seriousness, Robert, thank you very much excuse me, for the invitation to be here, which originally was just going to be virtual, but I believe it was you who sent me a message on Instagram saying, hey, would you want to do this in person? And so, of course, I wanted to do it in person, to be here with all of you. So thank you all very much for coming out this evening. So why write this book? This is a complete accident of timing in terms of where we are as a nation. But really, you know, I sat down and wrote the original stories that basically formulate the opening chapters of the book as sort of a way of getting away from Trump 1. So during the first Trump administration, you know, in the business that I'm in, I had no choice but to pay attention to what was happening, but it was becoming a lot. And so there was one weekend when I decided, you know what, all these stories about my summers down south with my grandparents in rural North Carolina, and my Jehovah's Witness grandmother, and going witnessing with her, those stories were right here, and I thought, I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna write. I'm just gonna get them out of my head and turn them into pixels. And so I spent the entire weekend writing. And when I finished writing the original pages, which I called the Down South chapters, I sent them to friends to read, just to say, hey, is this even interesting? And I sent them to 3 friends in particular. I sent them to Tamron Hall, April Ryan, and Joy Reid. And they each wrote back almost right away after having read what I sent them. This is so good. This is so well done. Keep going. And April Ryan in particular, I would see her out in Washington and she would say, are you still going? Keep going. Your story needs to get out there. You need to write this book. And that's 2017. Oh. We're now 8 years later, and finally, she would see me. Do you have an agent? Do you have a publisher? Do you do blah, 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 blah. Finally got it done. Finally got the book deal we signed in March, I think, of 23. Oh. With a June 1, 24 deadline. And then all the editing and everything that goes into it for a May 20th publish date. And so for me, writing this book was more, initially it was to escape Trump 1, but the more I wrote, the more, I mean, I'm a writer. I love writing. And I just couldn't stop. But it was a matter of, okay, well, what am I trying to say? What do I want to say? And that took time. And it wasn't until, you know, I met with a publisher and they had a clear vision for what I could do, given all the stuff that I had written, and I showed it to him. And he sent me this beautiful email and said, in short, there is a book here. And so there is a book here.
I said this to him earlier today, that having followed his career, I was always impressed by what appeared to be an extraordinarily self-confident man. He carried himself well, he dresses well, he speaks brilliantly, he writes even better. And so when I read the book, I realized how human he was. And sometimes that's not always something that you expect when it's somebody who is known, someone with a public persona. And how did you, I mean, granted, a lot of it's in the book, but you had to face fears of whether you were going to be successful, whether your career was going to pick up again when you felt that it was going down. And what gave you the strength, especially being that you're black, you're gay, you were in New York, you were from New Jersey, I mean.
Hey, where's Monique? Let's get him.
You know, so there were lots of obstacles. You faced a lot of obstacles. You sailed through them with flying colors, but I'm sure there were times when you didn't think that that was possible.
The whole, I mean, I'm supposed to make it look effortless. I remember having a conversation with Jordan Roth where we were talking about, he's an amazingly creative person, and I mentioned to him how he made something look so easy. And he said to me, but you of all people know that that's our job. Our job is to make it look easy when it really isn't. And, of course, I have this very self-confident, self-assured exterior demeanor. As you've read the book, but when all of you in the audience read the book, you will come to understand, well, why. And particularly if you're African American, you absolutely understand why intuitively. And when you read the book, you will see that I am honest, raw. These are words other people have used to tell me, introspective. And I think that goes back to what I viewed as the literary foundation of why I was so genuine and honest and raw and introspective. There were two books I read 20 years apart. The first was Katharine Graham's memoir, Personal History, which if you haven't read it, read it. It is a beautiful memoir. But what stuck out to me and the reason why I loved it was because here you have this woman, the most powerful woman in journalism, and one of the most powerful women in the country, who writes this memoir where she is unbelievably honest about her fraught relationship with her mother, her insecurities about running the Washington Post after the death of her husband, the fights she had with Lyndon Johnson, President Johnson, then President Nixon and Watergate. And to me, I thought, wow, here is this powerful woman who's laying it all out there for us to see. This is the kind of memoir that I really loved reading. Fast forward 20 years, and Charles Blow wrote his memoir, Fire Shut Up in My Bones. Again, another genuine, raw, honest, introspective look at this person's life. And after reading it, and I didn't know Charles well then, but after reading that book, I understood his columns for the New York Times a whole lot better. I understood, no pun intended, where the fire came from in his columns. And so I thought, if I were to ever write a book, if I were to ever write a memoir, it would have to be as genuine and open and honest and introspective as those two people. I mean, you could not get more different than Kay Graham, straight white woman, wealthy white woman, and Charles Blow, not straight, now reasonably doing very well, gay black man. And yet they wrote memoirs that informed the way I would write mine. And then one other person, Richie Jackson, who is also married to Jordan Roth, but Richie Jackson was writing his memoir entitled Gay Like Me, a letter from a father to his son, to his gay son. And that book, if you haven't read it, is also beautifully done. And if you are a gay man of a certain age who lived in New York City in the 80s and the 90s, to me, as I lived in New York City for 16 years, and the New York that he wrote about, it was a giant love letter to our generation of gay men, but also to the city. But he was also open and honest and raw. And he said to me, when we were staying with them, Jonathan, don't forget, and this is as I was writing, he said, Jonathan, don't forget to put yourself on every page. Make sure that when folks turn the page that they see you, that they hear you. And so you put those three people, Katharine Graham, Charles Blow, Richie Jackson, together, and they were sort of my guardian angels, literary angels, to write this book.
Interesting. Another person that you talk about is Frederick Douglass. He also wrote a lot. Does that tie into how you see the world at all?
I mean, a little bit, but I mean, I talk about Frederick Douglass at the very end of the book, and this was David Blight, Professor Blight at Yale, wrote this monster biography of Frederick Douglass. It's 900 pages. And Professor Blight, if you're watching, I apologize. I'm still on page 200. But there was a paragraph that I read, again, during the first Trump administration, when, as a journalist, there were things happening I'd never seen before that really concerned me, that had me, like a lot of Americans, despondent and sort of despairing of what was happening. And he had this paragraph where he basically does a survey of Douglass's life. Born into slavery, escaped, taught himself to read, became a great orator, the most photographed person of the 19th or 20th century, world renowned, lived through a great time. He saw the end of slavery. He worked for women's suffrage. He did all these things, and yet he lived long enough to see all of the things he worked for reversed by Congress, the courts, and the president. And I read that, and that paragraph and a jolt went through me, because I realized in that moment that history is not linear. History is cyclical. And so I'm reading this paragraph about Frederick Douglass, and yet I'm reading that paragraph as a free, out gay black man with a prestigious job, living in Washington, D.C., married to my husband. To not understand the sweep of history between that paragraph that Blight wrote and my reading it, and when I was reading it, it gave me a bit of comfort, because it showed me that we have been through worse as a nation, and that we have gotten through it, and that maybe in this time, well, then it was 2017, but even now, 8 years later, 2025, that we will get through this. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be rough as hell, but we will get through it. And so that, if anything, it's more David Blight's words about Frederick Douglass's life that, was a big signal for me. And also, for those of you who have the book already, if you look at the cover, there's an Easter egg on the cover. And we made this decision during the photo shoot. So the photographer, Beowulf Sheehan, did a whole Google search before we talked, and he said, Jonathan, I've only seen one photograph of you not in the big, thick frames, and there are no photographs of you not in a jacket and tie. And so I think we need to do something different. Those glasses are not a prop. I actually have those glasses, and I wear them from time to time. They just don't work on television, which is why I don't wear them as often. We tried t-shirts, me in a white t-shirt, and I was like, come on, I'm trying to. No one's gonna believe this. This is trying too hard. Now, Beowulf, to his credit, he said, we can try a t-shirt, but I see you in a collared shirt, no tie, no jacket. And so that's what we did. But I decided to bring a French cuff shirt. And I brought a series of cufflinks, silk knots, a couple pairs of cufflinks that I bought at a French flea market the year before, and then another set of silver cufflinks that I bought at the Featherstone Gallery on Martha's Vineyard. And if you look at the cover, I'm sort of giving it away, but they are Harriet Tubman. And so I said to Beowulf, well, how about I wear these, because it's in keeping with sort of, I'm not related to her, but I kind of am. My story is why she was escaped from slavery and helped all sorts of other people escape from slavery, in addition to being a Union spy. But I digress. So we're taking the photos. This is a 6-hour photo shoot, and I'm, posing like this, as you can see. And at one point, I said, "Hey, Beowulf, let's put an Easter egg in there and see if anyone notices." And I said, "Let's turn Harriet so that she too is looking directly at the camera." And so I'm looking at the camera, and so is Harriet Tubman looking at the camera. And to me, again, just as that paragraph on Douglass is sort of showing a sweep of history, to me, so is having Harriet Tubman on my cufflinks in this picture. And I bought those cufflinks for the sole purpose of wearing her to black tie events. Just as a nice, come on, Harriet, let's go.
Very good. I like that. Do you see something in the sweep of history with Douglass and the sweep of history of your own life?
I mean, that's... Wow.
Not on that magnitude
I was
necessarily.
going to thank you,
because certainly slavery is gone, but
Well, no, but I
but like you said, you're married. That wasn't the case when you were growing up.
Right.
Job security wouldn't have been the case. Housing wouldn't have been the case. In the book, you talk about coming out to your mother.
Mm-hmm.
I won't go into it, but you can read the book.
I
But
actually might want to read that.
well, then maybe you will.
Well, no, finish your question and then
But that's still a big sweep of history.
Yeah.
Those are massive changes in a world that has changed.
Right.
But there are many historians and many others that believe that to some extent we're still fighting that Civil War because a lot of the things that might have happened had Lincoln lived didn't happen because of Johnson, didn't happen because of the people who came after Johnson. And we see today, even in the language of politicians and people on the right and certainly Christian nationalists, that there are lots of things that they're talking about that are the same as if we were back in 1850 or 1860.
Sure. And yet, as I say and I do want to read the coming out story to my mother because it's kind of humorous. But before I do that, I tell young people that when I came out in 1990, the America we were living in then was completely different than the one we're living in now. In the sense that when it came out to my mother said to me, "Don't tell anyone, because it'll ruin your career." Back then, yeah, it could. You could get fired, you could lose your home, you could lose your job, all sorts of things could happen to you. And I'm not denying the fact that still can happen. Those things still can happen. But the difference between then and now is that the culture has changed.
Absolutely.
In 1990, there was no Will and Grace. There was no RuPaul, or RuPaul's Drag Race, or RuPaul's Drag Race All-Stars, or RuPaul, and the whole franchise. There was none of that. You didn't have stories about kids coming out at 13, and then 10, and then 8, and then coming out as trans, even younger. So the culture of the country is completely different than it was then. And so in that regard, that's sort of another example of history being cyclical. How we've come a long way. I mean, you tell a young person who's come out at 10 that you realize when I was 10, I didn't say a word. I didn't come out until I was, 19, 20. Didn't come out to my mother until I was whatever age that was in 90. So, yeah, I'm a little thrown by this, this connection between me and Douglas, and I can't. That's too close. But can I read
You
the
can.
coming out
Go right ahead.
story? Let me find it. When I was doing all of that stuff, I forgot to put, what is that? It's Today Show, Native New Yorker, Dinkins. Okay, here it is. Nope. Oh no, that's the chapter 8. It's a riot, but I'm not going to read it. Okay, here we go. And this is after my mom and I have moved back to Hazlitt, New Jersey, after her marriage to my then stepfather ended. And she said that when she walked back into our empty home in Hazlitt, she finally felt at peace. Then I write, as would I a few days later, when back in my old room, I finally came out to my mother. It began with an argument. Mom had gone full born-again Christian during her marriage to my stepfather. The Bible became her safe harbor from a union that never should have happened. And now, she'd come up to my room to tell me how much of a jerk I'd been since returning from Carleton. She didn't like me calling her out on some of the less than kind comments and broad generalizations she'd been making about various folks. This is her talking to me. Ever since you came back from Carleton, you haven't been the same. You're not the same child I sent to college, she said. You've come back from college so liberal. She paused after each so and practically spit out the word liberal. This got me monologuing about oppressed peoples like a superhero thundering against injustice before putting an end to it. And then I decided to just go there, to create the conditions that would force her to ask the question. In my defense of gays and lesbians, I complained about how they were always talking about getting into the mainstream. Sometimes I just want to scream, hey, you're already in the mainstream, I told her. You're doctors, lawyers, judges, journalists. You're everywhere. Then came the query whose answer I spent years hiding from her. Well, are you gay? Sitting on that futon with my legs pretzeled in front of me, I felt exposed, like I was under a spotlight during the final scene of a one-man show. So many times I'd arrived at this point, my moment of truth, and chickened out. I never feared that Mom would kick me out or disown me. Still, I hadn't been ready then to stop crafting and sputtering the lies that reinforced the closet. But that day in my childhood bedroom, with a big gulp and a deep breath, I said, yes. Mom let out a gasp and asked, why, as her hands shot up to her cheeks. I told her that I didn't know why, but that I'd known the fact of it since I was 10. Sensing she might go down that route so many parents do to pinpoint the reason for their child's homosexuality, I added, it's not your fault. And then she wasted no time asking some direct questions. Have you had, Mom stammered before making hand motions to indicate anal sex. No, I said, to which she replied, thank God. She then asked about oral sex, and I screamed, Mother! Yet she persisted. I gave in and said, yes. She then asked, do you use a condom? I lied, yes. And you have to keep in mind, my mother is now a retired registered nurse. So after asking if I had a boyfriend, no, I did not. Mom did a gay roll call as she inquired about each of my friends she'd met. Then she made 3 requests. First, don't tell anyone else. She worried my coming out would have an impact on career opportunities. My mindset then could be described as don't tell, don't deny. I wasn't going to run around telling everyone, but I wasn't going to deny it if someone asked me. How could I? I was gay to the naked eye. Anyone paying attention could see that the only thing straight about me was the crease in my pants. Second, don't walk like one. Her demonstration was what we in the Black community call switching, where you exaggeratedly swivel your hips from side to side with every step. In terms of stereotypical gay markers, switching ranks up there with the limp wrist. When I asked her if I walked like one, she said no. Third, don't go over to any of those marches over there in New York. Mom apologized when I told her that each of her requests was homophobic. Today, my mother is an embodiment of how far Americans have come in their acceptance of LGBTQ plus people. When Nick and I got married, she said that she now has 2 sons.
How do you follow that? So the relationship, I mean, by the book, your relationship with your mother was pretty good all along. Mm-hmm. You were in this world together very often when you felt the rest of the world was against either one of you.
Well, you have to remember, my father died when I was 4 months old. And so my mother didn't remarry until I was 16. So really, it was, you know that Helen Reddy song, You and Me Against the World?
That's exactly what
I thought that song was made for us. And to this day, whenever I hear that song, I have to be alone because I will always tear up. Always. It makes me think of me and my mother. And I think that's also why I never feared that she would kick me out of the house. Because as much as we were mother and son, we're a lot like siblings. Basically growing up together. My mother was 25, 26 when my father died. And I was just 4 months old. So, having been a 25, 26-year-old, I can only imagine what her life was like and the way she felt and what she thought about her capabilities and things at that age, and then having to raise me. I recognize that there are a lot of LGBTQ plus kids out there for whom that relationship doesn't exist with either parent or both parents. And it wasn't really until I sat down to write the book and really sort of being introspective about that part of my relationship with my mother that I understood just how lucky I was to have that type of relationship with her.
It certainly helps you be a healthy human being when you have that kind of relationship with your parent. Mm-hmm. And I think that from reading the book, I think that gave you a lot of the strength that you needed when you doubted yourself.
Excuse me. Yeah. My mother, from a very early age, taught me, well, first, the key thing, my mother said to me from as early as I can remember, you are going to college. Then the next thing she said was, because if you are 18 and not in college, you will not be living here. I am not taking care of a grown man. So, going to college was always on the roadmap. It was always a part of the plan. The other thing that my mother did, because she's the widow and with a young child, she taught me to be self-sufficient, meaning don't depend on anyone really for anything. You have to be self-sufficient. And so my mom taught me how to do the basics. She will even say she's not a great cook, and she wasn't. But she taught me the basics. She taught me how to boil water for pasta. She taught me how to scramble eggs. She taught me how to bake a chicken. Well, not a chicken, chicken parts. She taught me how to make vegetables, how to do things. She taught me how to iron, just so that I could know how to, have, pressed clothes.
Keep that straight.
Yes. Well, then I discovered the dry cleaner. So she taught me all of these things about how to be self-sufficient. And then in that, I think, came the lessons of resiliency. You know, watching, I think I just sort of intuitively learned from her in the early years. And then always knowing that I had to be my own safety net. And when you have that mindset, your mind and your antenna are, I think, completely different. And that you start to grow a sense of, you know, I like to think that my spidey senses are pretty good, and they have done me well so far. But you know, sitting and writing, there's a chapter, I don't remember which chapter title, but it's 2 expletives. The first one begins with an F and is 6 letters, and the second one begins with an S and is 4, ends with a T. And it is the 5 years from 2002 to 2007 when everything fell apart, everything in New York City, professionally, personally, and created the conditions that allowed me to leave my beloved New York to go to Washington. I liked Washington as a visitor and always thought, that'd be nice to live there. But to actually uproot myself from New York and go to Washington, you know, that particular chapter was difficult to write. But it was also fun to write because I'm writing about it from the other side, right? Long after those years, and having enough distance to understand what happened and to write about it and to be honest about my shortcomings, things I did wrong, things that went wrong, relationships that went wrong, and how that felt, and what all those things meant. But in all of that, in every setback, in every hardship that has happened, and I use hardship with a lowercase h because the stuff I write about, that there are people who have gone through worse and are going through worse. But the lessons I learned going through all of that have, you know, propelled me now. And that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to, as I sat down and started writing the book, and the publisher said, think about lessons. And, you know, the lessons that I learned that are sprinkled throughout the book, you know, I'm excited for people to read them and to maybe internalize them and use them for themselves. And I also hope that you will see parts of yourselves either in my story or in the situations that I've been in, because I'm hardly unique, but I do think that some of the things I went through and the lessons that I put in the book will be helpful to someone.
No, I think that the stories that you tell are definitely reflective of what most people go through, but I do think you're unique in the sense of your accomplishments, because not that many people get to a position or get to the positions that you have, and that's extraordinary, and something I'm sure your mother is proud of, because it is unique, and that's something that you too are probably proud of, and deservedly so. What are some of the lessons, having gone through the process of writing the book, that you came away with that have formulated the way you're moving forward now?
Well, the lessons that I write about in the book, I mean, these are lessons that, you know, I still use. You know, there are 4. The first one is when someone asks you what you want, tell them. Because you never know what could come of it. The story, there are two particular stories that give that lesson that give that lesson life. You've heard them both. Which one would you, the Today Show or Bloomberg?
Today Show.
So it is the day of my Carleton College interview in New York, and it was at the New York Hilton. And NBC was just a few blocks down, so I called my Uncle McKinley. My Uncle McKinley was an electrician at 30 Rock. And so, just a side note, there is no one in my family who was a writer, a journalist, in television, nothing. And yet here I was, the person in the family who told anyone who would listen that I wanted to be a news commentator. And only because my Uncle McKinley called and said, hey, I'm going into work, the Today Show is doing something on the plaza, I'm gonna try to get into the camera range and I'll try to wave. So turn on the Today Show. So I turned on the Today Show and saw, because I was a big tattletale as a kid, and I saw these people on television telling other people's business. So I thought, whoa, you can get paid for that? This is great. So thus began my fascination with television news and foreign reporting. And so my Uncle McKinley says, sure, come on down. I get to where the electricians are. He says, you're just in time, I have work to do in the nightly news office. And I thought, I am struck gold. I am going to meet Tom Brokaw and John Chancellor and Garrick Utley, all these greats from way back when. And I get there and there's no one there. It's 9 in the morning, there's no one in the office, except this one woman sitting at a desk, drinking coffee, eating a bagel, reading one of the tabloids, and I'm on a sofa where my uncle told me to sit. And I'm staring at her, trying to work up the courage to talk to her, to ask her questions. And I finally asked her if she worked there, and she said yes. And she told me her name, Ann Skakel-Tarian. And then, you see a kid in front of you, you ask, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And so she says to me, and she says that to me, and I say to her, well, I want to be a Moscow correspondent for NBC. And then I'm trying to decide between the London Bureau and the White House. Now, if I go to the London Bureau, then I definitely want to go to the White House afterwards. And then I want to come to New York and be anchor of the Today Show. I don't know what look she had on her face. I know what look I would have had on mine. And so my uncle, I don't know how long it was after, but my uncle comes back and says, it's time to go. And I thanked her for her time. And she said, wait a minute. And she opened the drawer, pulled out an NBC notepad, wrote down the name of Kay Bradley and her phone number, and with a flourish, ripped it off and said, here, get yourself an internship on the Today Show. And that was the first step in my journey to be here right now.
And it's all in the book.
The second lesson is make it work for you. And this involved, I was going through some stuff at the Washington Post, and I was wondering, maybe it's time to go, I don't know. So I sent up a bat signal to the great Gwen Ifill. And Gwen said, okay, let's meet for breakfast at the Fairmont. So I meet her for breakfast. I unspool everything that's happening. And the first thing she says is, well, you're not quitting a job without having a job. And I said, yes, Gwen, I know, I'm a black man in America. But then she said, make it work for you, because that's what they would do. And the they was about my white colleagues at the Post. Now, Gwen, before she was at PBS NewsHour, she was at NBC. Before that, she was at the Times. Before that, she was at the Washington Post. So she knew all the people I was talking about. And it took me a while to understand what make it work for you meant. But when I figured it out, that turns into the third lesson, and that was go where your talents are wanted. And so I realized that making it work for me meant going to Brussels or Marrakesh or Florence or wherever to do live events, or go up to New York and guest host on WNYC on the radio and interview people. It meant doing my podcast at the Post. It meant still writing my columns. It meant doing all the things that I love to do, putting all of what I thought were my talents to work. And that leads to the fourth lesson. And that is, everything we do in life is an audition for something else. We just don't know what for yet. And so I'm doing all of these things, thinking all these disparate things that I love to do. There's nothing that really connects them except it's somehow in journalism in a way. And then Joy Reid got elevated to the old hardball spot, and they had to fill her position. And so I got into the rotation to audition for the job. And suddenly, all the live events I was doing, all the guest hosting on the radio, all the podcast interviews that I had done, all those what I thought were disparate things came together when I sat in the anchor chair to audition for what then became my very own show on MSNBC.
Where would you see yourself in 5 years from now?
Hopefully still at MSNBC. Look, our industry is changing. It used to be by the year. Then it's every 6 months. And now it's changing constantly. And AI is going to make it change even more drastically. And so just from a technological standpoint, I don't even know where our profession is going to be. Therefore, I'm not quite sure where I'm going to be in 5 years. But at the same time, as we're going through technological turmoil in our profession, we're dealing with a president who, went from calling us the enemy of the people in his first term to suing news organizations for doing things he doesn't like. He has sued ABC, he has sued CBS, he has sued any number of news organizations. And so, you put those two twin pressures, and so the profession is going through it. I just hope in 5 years, I am still, I'm not kidding, I hope I'm still at MSNBC. Not that there's any danger of me leaving. Don't worry, I just got a promotion, so I will be there. But in 5 years, I still want to be in a position to continue to tell the truth and to hold the powerful accountable, to do what I'm doing right now, maybe in a different format, different way, but still doing it as a journalist.
MSNBC and NBC, or cable vision, have parted ways business-wise.
Right.
And will MSNBC, without that major corporation behind it, be able to do all that you would like to accomplish in telling the truth and holding people accountable?
Sure. I mean, the separation is already underway. The company name initially was SpinCo. It now has a name, Versant. MSNBC will keep its name, so we will continue to be MSNBC. The president of MSNBC, Rebecca Cutler, she's got a daunting job ahead of her, but she's got an exciting job because in an industry that is cutting and laying off people, she's out there trying to hire 100 journalists to set up a newsroom that can stand on its own. She's hired a chief of operations, she's hired a Washington bureau chief, very serious people. Eugene Daniels and Jackie Alimany, my co-hosts on the weekend, Jackie left the Washington Post to go full-time to MSNBC. Eugene Daniels left Politico to go full-time to be part of the staff at MSNBC, not just anchor the show, but reporting and doing things online. So, MSNBC is in a very good spot. And so I'm not worried about MSNBC being able to stand alone and stand on its own 2 feet.
So that's very good. I think that's good for journalism in general, because you need as many voices and as many trusted voices as possible in a world where it's very hard to trust any information.
Right, and I just want to be clear, there are a lot of people who worry about, because of all the program changes, that the network is pulling back from what they view it as. And all I would say to that is that's not changing. The news hours from 10 until 4 will remain, so-called straight news. Just hear the facts, and then from 4 through 11 o'clock will be what we call perspective television. You're still going to see the same sort of opinionated reporting, perspective reporting from everyone during those hours. And I say, opinion reporting, perspective reporting, everything that we do at the network is based in reporting and the truth as we know it in the time when we're reporting it. And unlike other places that will just say anything about what's happening in the country, you might not agree with someone's take on MSNBC about what's happening, but you can't deny that the take is based on reporting from either MSNBC, NBC News, or any reputable, legitimate news outlet, because we want our opinions based in facts. And the commitment to that shouldn't be questioned.
No, I think I'm glad that you said it, because it's very important for people to hear that there are news organizations that still hold themselves to a high standard, because that's not necessarily what our perception is based on social media, based on all of these things that have led us to believe that there is no truth out there and that we don't know what to believe. And so I think that it's equally important that when you opened this evening, you talked about telling the truth, and that you are a truth teller, and that the book is truthful, that the work that you do is truthful. I just fear that we get so much misinformation and so much disinformation that the people and the institutions that we should be able to count on to make the proper decisions for ourselves, for our families, and for the country don't get unrooted, and that we are able to do what we need to do as citizens and as people. So thank you.
Well, thank you. One thing I would say that everyone in this room and everyone who's watching online, that you also have a responsibility in all of this. When Twitter was not what it is now, and I would put my columns on there would be people who would pop off just on the headline or on a quote, and they think I've said it. And I'll ask, did you read the piece? No, I'm just going on the headline. And so I started tweeting to people, read before you tweet. And then it just got to be so much, I would say to people, if I wrote the way most people read, I'd be fired. I spend so much time on a column. I'm thinking of, okay, what do I want to say? I put it down. Every time I make an assertion, I have you in the back of my head, someone yelling up, jumping up and screaming, how do you know that? If I put a dollar figure, a poll number, a quote from someone, if I make an assertion, someone's going to say, how do you know that? What are you basing that on? There's always a hyperlink. I always put in it takes me a long time because I respect the intelligence of the people whoever they are, reading. So I figure I'm going to give them the evidence of where this comes from. And yet, no one does it. They're not clicking the link to begin with. And then if they do, they might not get past even the second paragraph. And I could have 10 hyperlinks in the first 2 paragraphs, and no one's going to click the hyperlinks. And so, for all of you who like to get into arguments with relatives and the MAGA neighbor or the neighbor who you don't agree with, you can't have these arguments if you don't have all the rhetorical ammunition. That's the other thing that I'm also doing when I'm writing. Okay, if you're reading me, then that means you trust what I'm telling you. And so if you're truly reading me and I put a hyperlink in there, you damn well better click the hyperlink because there's more information in there for you to when you go to Thanksgiving dinner and you sit down across Uncle Chuck, who you know you're going to get into an argument with. I'm giving you all this stuff. In short, you must learn to be as discerning about the information you take in as I am in doing all the reporting and writing a column for you. Because this profession is the only profession that is protected in the Constitution. Journalism is protected in the Constitution. Why? Because the Founding Fathers understood and they knew that a democracy can only survive or can't survive unless the populace is an educated and knowing populace. And it is the press's job to inform the citizenry. And so what happens if the citizenry refuses to be informed? Or the citizenry is popping off on things that they don't fully understand? And that was when they founded the country. Look where we are now, where there are, to your point, all sorts of entities, from people to nations to corporations, that are doing everything they can to manipulate what we see, what we read, the misinformation, the disinformation. And so as much as we are trying to fight it from the standpoint of truth and facts as journalists, you also have to fight it from the standpoint of just as a citizen. It's a two-way street.
No, I've long said that out of all the democracies in the world, ours is the most reliant on an informed and educated citizenry. And that voting is the least you can do as a citizen, but you must be informed.
Right.
And we have the opportunity to be informed, and we have selected over and over again not to take that opportunity to get the information that we need to make an intelligent decision. And so it is interesting how they set up the country in the beginning. It is interesting how it has grown. And it is interesting at the availability of getting a decent education in the United States that doesn't exist in many other parts of the world. It does in the West, but not in every part of the world. And so we have these advantages and we take them for granted. And so what you were saying, and I'm glad that this has come up, because I think that for democracy, for our style of democracy to survive, it is exactly what you said that is needed in order for us to prosper and overcome what's happening now. But we see how many Americans on all sides of every issue are lazy. And laziness doesn't work in a democracy that demands good citizenship.
Right, and it's not going to work. I mean, lazy is not going to work now.
Absolutely not. So, what would you like to say at the end before we take some questions?
I'm wondering, I'm sitting here thinking if I should read one more fun little story.
If you want to, you can.
Okay. This is early in my career at the Daily News, and here it is. And I'm going to the airport to interview Reverend Jesse Jackson. In this part of the book, I'm writing about how I didn't fully understand the power of being on an editorial board, of writing editorials, of why people, particularly politicians, cared so much about what was written. And so this is one of the stories. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this particular part, well, I'll just read it. Like most African Americans, I regarded the man who was on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel with Martin Luther King Jr. that fateful day with a healthy dose of reverence. So as the taxi took the Triborough Bridge route to LaGuardia, I readied myself for my meeting with history. Having flown the Delta shuttle during my Today Show researcher days, I knew there were conference rooms not too far from the gates, and I secured one upon my arrival. And then I waited. I scanned all the arriving passengers from the surrounding gates for Jackson's familiar face. What I learned that day was that arriving shuttles let travelers deplane from the back and walk the tarmac to baggage claim on the lower level. That's where I found Jackson, but he wasn't alone. The Reverend Al Sharpton was there with him. His James Brown-inspired hair was as impressive in person as it was on television. Sharpton looked and acted like the bull in a china shop. His every utterance on behalf of African Americans, the poor, victims of police brutality and racism, no justice, no peace, was meant to rattle the status quo. Wherever the flames of racism lit in the 5 boroughs, Sharpton seemed to be there to watch them, fan them, tamp them. I wasn't a fan. The interview was about a school initiative Jackson was proposing for New York City, one that a city council staffer who lived in Chicago told me was a carbon copy of an unworkable plan he'd proposed there. Now was my chance to talk to him face to face. But just as I was positioning my tape recorder in place, Jackson complimented my suit. I told him that it was the first designer suit I bought since graduating college. Then Sharpton said something unintelligible that sounded like, "Wakana Sugawa." I asked him to repeat his query in the hopes my ears would get accustomed to his rhythmic street preacher cadence. "Wakana Sugawa," came the reply. What I heard was still unintelligible, but I took it to mean, "What kind of suit is that?" I was so proud of that suit. A double-breasted navy blue with widely spaced pinstripes and peak lapels by Christian Dior, which I found on a rack at a Joseph A. Bank somewhere in New Jersey. Whenever I wore it, I felt like $1,000,000. Whenever I wore it, people took notice. "Oh, it's a Christian Dior," I told Sharpton, and what I envisioned as the prelude to my going into all the details about what I liked about my purchase. Then, clearly, and with precise diction, Sharpton said, "No, I asked you, what college did you go to?"
Christian Dior.
My face radiated with the heat of humiliation. My eyes were surely the size of saucers. My designer-clad body was frozen. I broke the awkward silence when I replied, Carleton College. Sharpton and Jackson burst out laughing. Each tried to outdo the other with a joke at my expense. I went to the College of Pierre Cardin, said Jackson with a chuckle. I went to the College of Yves Saint Laurent, Sharpton said, as the two prominent preachers dapped, pointed fingers, and slapped the table, which I prayed to disappear. Ha ha, very funny. Let's get started, I said as I pressed record.
So in a moment, we'll take some questions from the audience, but before we do that, this evening was co-sponsored by PEN America, so William Johnson would like to say a couple of words about PEN.
Oh, no, that's all right. I'll be really quick. Jonathan, thank you for sharing your story.
Thank
I
you.
can't wait to read your book and hear more about your mother. PEN America, are folks familiar with PEN? Anyone? Well, we are an arts organization that actually has two missions. PEN believes in the power of literature to connect us and challenge us. But we also know that those challenges and connections can't happen if people aren't allowed to exchange ideas freely. And right now, that ability to exchange ideas in Florida is under threat. PEN America has country information that really tells us that 10,000 books across the country have been banned, and 4,000 of those are in Florida. And can you imagine which books those are? They are people of color and gay, LGBTQ. So we fight and push back on that two ways, litigation and advocacy campaign. If you want to join us in the fight, there is a sign-up sheet in the back. Sign up, get more information. I just want to reiterate, literary engagement, this is part of the work. So we're proud to help sponsor this event. So thank you, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you, William.
So just like it's important to be part of PEN, I'm hoping that on your way out, if you're not a member of Stonewall, you will join. I hope you bought your books. Stonewall is a membership organization. Our ability to tell your stories, our ability to keep our archive filled with the lives and culture of our people is tied to you. Without you, there's no us. That means not only your money is important, but also your archival possessions, your stories, your records, the culture that you've experienced is all vitally important to us so that we can share it with others. As we see that arc of history, we know how important it is to make it available to everyone that comes after us. Because when they see what we have accomplished, they know that they can accomplish just as much, if not more. And that's vitally important. Because we hear a lot of bad things every day in the news. And I know for me that when I walk into Stonewall every morning and I walk into that archive, I am bombarded with the fact that these people that came before us fought and survived and did better than the people before them. And I feel so much stronger every single day because I live amongst them. Because their stories have become my story. And when we do an exhibit on trans women of color, and I get to be in that space, I feel strength. When we created the Stonewall National Women's Fund, and women became the fastest growing group of members of Stonewall, I felt strength. Because by building community, we build survival. But equally important, for the world to be a better place, we have to raise people up from the bottom. We are often the scapegoats. We have representation from all these other worlds, all these different colors and races and creeds. If we raise ourselves up, if we float our boats, we float every other group in the United States of America. When we rise, the country rises. So we have unique responsibilities, but we see that in the books and in the archives and in the exhibits that we put up at Stonewall. So please become a member. Help us survive to tell your story now and tomorrow. And now we'll go to questions. Anybody have a question? Of Jonathan. Just to be on the safe side.
I have a good one. I have a question.
Okay.
How do you feel with what ABC did using Terry Moran as an example, violating his First Amendment rights for his opinion as an individual, not as a journalist, of what's going on?
So just in case folks watching the live stream didn't hear, there's a question about the firing of Terry Moran from ABC and my thoughts on him being fired for exercising his First Amendment rights, expressing his opinion, not as a journalist, but as a person.
You guys have a double-edged sword. You have to be careful because it's misconstrued.
So here's the thing. When you are in these positions, there's no such thing as your own personal opinion. I'm on the opinion side of journalism. My job is to, Terry Moran and I could go to the same event or the same something happening, do the same reporting, but Terry has to tell the story straight. He's got to tell the who, what, where, when, why, how, maybe put it into context, and leave it at that. I get to do all those things, but then say, but this is why this is wrong, and why that person is wrong, or why this idea is a stupid idea, or a bad idea, or why this is a great idea, or why this person is great. What Terry Moran did, and and I just want to be clear, he is a phenomenal journalist, but he crossed the line. No matter who the president is, leave aside that this is the Trump administration and who he was talking about. If he had said that about anybody in any presidential administration, the same thing would have happened. Simply because he crossed a journalistic line. And for ABC News as a news entity, its credibility as a straight news source, that down the middle, not, you're not supposed to know what the reporters think really about the people they're covering. You're not. And what Terry did was he put himself in a bad position, but he also put the network in a bad position. And so, even though I'm on the opinion side, if I had tweeted something out like that, I don't know if I would have gotten fired, but I certainly would have gotten a phone call from the president of the network, probably saying, take that down. Probably. It hasn't happened to me. Because I wouldn't, just keep that in mind. And again, Terry Moran, phenomenal journalist, made a big mistake. And, he was held accountable for it.
Other questions?
I'm a big fan.
Here, do it in the mic.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of MSNBC, and I think I was drawn in by Rachel, and I love how Rachel is always unapologetic about talking about her partner. And then I started noticing you, and you were doing the same thing when you talk about your partner. By the way, we have the same birthday, July 2nd.
Oh, happy almost birthday.
But I was wondering if you could tell, in your business, do you have the powers that be tell you to not do that, to tone that down, to not talk about your partners, or because you do it in such a casual way?
Yeah.
It's not apologetically, and I just love watching it as a viewer. And if you were ever warned not to do that.
No. No one has ever told me, stop talking about Nick. That's my husband. or tone it down. No. Have you seen my co-anchor, Eugene Daniels? Right? I mean, come on. He's got the big, beautiful throat with the curls, the nails, the brooches. And also think about this. When I got the phone call that I was going to the weekend, and that one of the co-anchors was going to be Eugene Daniels, I jumped for joy because Eugene and I are friends. And then when I found out who the third one was going to be, I thought, this is going to be incredible. But so that day, that Monday night, I sent Eugene a text message. Can you have dinner? He said, yes, but let's go someplace private. So we went to a private club. And sitting there and talking, just the two of us, so excited. He's excited because his world was turned upside down 2 days before. And I'm excited because I know that at least one of the co-hosts at that point was going to be someone that I knew and loved, and it was going to be fun. But as we were talking, I looked at him and I said, oh, man, Eugene, do you know what's about to happen? When we do this show, we're going to make history. We're going to make history as the first two out gay black men to anchor a national television show. And so, being who we are isn't a liability, not to the bosses. It's an asset. And mind you, yeah, we talk about our spouses or our partners casually because we can. It's not about making a statement. It's about being who we are and treating our lives as simply and basically as our straight colleagues. When they talk about their families and their kids and their wives and their husbands. I remember when I got an email from someone years ago when I just casually mentioned, my husband, and they wrote me saying that they were so moved by it, by how casually I just said it. And that as if it was no big deal, but to that person it was a huge deal. Because it was me saying who I am in just that one casual reference. And also it showed them just how far we've come that I could actually do that. And so, there's no one telling us to do less or tone it down or tamp it down. And if anything, by us being casual about our lives outside of the camera, away from the camera, only endears us to the audience more because we're being ourselves. And let's not forget, when I got engaged 8 years ago, was it 2016? Oh God, 9 years ago. Yeah, 9 years ago this May. Got engaged, and we were in Italy, and we put it on Facebook, we did it on social media, and back here in the States, MSNBC was doing things. Our own Jonathan Capehart got engaged to his long-term partner. I went on Hardball with Chris asking me, wow, this is great, congratulations. We showed pictures. When my mother told me not to tell anyone in 1990, think about that. So yeah, we will continue to casually talk about our spouses.
Jonathan, thank you for being your authentic self on television and a role model for many.
Thank you.
In your broadcast career, what has probably been the most challenging event or story that you had to report on air, and how'd you get through it?
Oh, wow. I mean, that's easy. That was the first assassination attempt of Donald Trump. It was during the campaign, and this was when I had my show. This was on I think this was Saturday. It was either Saturday or Sunday. So it was either the Saturday show or the Sunday show. We spent, days putting together a show. And we have our guests and everything. And we had a little meeting before, and so everything was going fine. I interviewed one member of Congress and then shifted to another member of Congress, Congressman Robert Garcia. We were talking, and my executive producer screamed into my ear, "Go to Trump, go to Trump." Now I'm live on television, and I'm thinking, what the hell with Trump? We didn't even talk about this. What is going on? She says that, and the camera's in front of me, and there's a playback monitor right here. And just as she's saying that, I see breaking news animation come over the screen. And just as that happened, Trump was rising up from the podium, and I remember the breaking news animation happens, and I say, okay, we are looking at live pictures from Butler, Pennsylvania, where Donald Trump is holding a campaign rally, and he stands up, and I see the blood trickling down his face, and all I could say was, where something has happened. We had no idea what had happened. And so for 10 minutes, all I could do was talk to the pictures that we saw on the screen, which meant saying over and over again that it was a campaign rally, Butler, Pennsylvania, and something happened. There's blood trickling down the side of his face. Secret Service agents are around him. The crowd is ducking down. All I could do was talk to the pictures. But in those moments, when you are on live television and an event like that happens, the whole game has changed. Mind you, and for all of you who are MSNBC viewers, you know what my opinion of the now president is, and at the time, the candidate was. But in that moment, what clicked in my head was, there is no room for politics now. A former president and current candidate for president, someone tried to kill him. This is a big moment for the country. It is an important moment. It's a dangerous moment. It is a serious moment. And so we were on air, no commercials, for 45 minutes. And I had to walk that line of not being political, being serious. And it wasn't hard, it wasn't difficult for me to do that, simply because I'm a student of politics, but also of history, and knew what that moment meant and was meaning for the country right then. And so, we got through that hour, and afterwards, as with every show, you come down from the adrenaline, the lights and the makeup and the camera and the everything. But the next day, as my husband and I went on on a walk, the momentousness, I don't even know if that's a word, but it sort of hit me that, what I had to report and how important it was and how it could have gone sideways at any moment, that is what made that perhaps the most difficult story or situation that I had to be a part of on television as an anchor. It's one thing to be a guest. When you are a guest, you can just sit, formulate your thoughts, try to come up with something to say. When you are live on television in the moment, that's when you are at your most vulnerable. But, I leave aside assassination attempts. I love breaking news. It is the most calm I ever am. because you have no choice but to talk. You have no choice but to say what's happening, talk to the pictures. But that was like a bucket list moment. I could have done without, but it happened, and the feedback that I got from the bosses was very good, and that's all I could ask for in a moment that serious.
One more? Hello?
Oh,
Do you like my heavenly light here coming through the same?
I was just gonna mention.
Would someone get this picture?
First of all, I want to make a statement, just say that it is so much better having you here in person than if this were to be presented to us virtually. Thank you very much. This is just fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Very well, what I want to ask is this. When you are on television or you're writing this book, do you have a sense that the people reading this or watching on TV share, for the most part, the same ideology, the same political viewpoint that's being presented on television by the various people who you have on your show or various other shows, and probably the people reading your book will probably also have some affinity for you and your views. Being aware of that, perhaps you can say whether you are or not aware that you're talking to people, of the same mindset. How do you get to the other people? How do you reach people who may not share, people who are now watching Fox News or reading Epic Times or Newsmax? How do you reach those people? Because those are the people I personally would love to reach and be able to have an exchange of views and let them hear your voice. How do you do that?
If they are watching Newsmax, they're not interested in what I have to say. If they're watching Fox, they might have an interest in what I have to say. I approach my audience, whether on television or in writing, I don't assume they agree with me. On MSNBC, my number one goal is to inform. Also in my writing, it is to inform. And if it turns out that most of the people watching agree with me, that's fine. But my goal is always to reach someone who might not agree with me, who might not be all the way there. And I might be their Sherpa to understanding what's happening. When Trayvon Martin was killed, and I wrote my first column, and I wrote in, the rules that I was taught. Don't run in public. Don't run with anything in your hands in public. In addition to all the other things we are taught as Black children. And the number of people who had been reading me for years who were writing to me saying, thank you, I did not know this. I didn't have an understanding. That to me is worth more than someone saying, oh, I fully agree with you 100%. That tells me that someone read, they internalized, they understood, and they learned something. And that's what I hope to do both in writing and on television. Just the other day, and now this is a guy who doesn't watch MSNBC, but he watches me on PBS NewsHour. And it was a light-colored suit. I don't think it was seersucker, but it was closed. And he says, Jonathan Capehart. And I turn around and say, hi. And he says, you don't know me. I'm so-and-so. I don't agree with you on 90% of anything. I am far right. I am far right. But I like listening to you. And I like listening to what you have to say. And I'm not going to always agree with you, but at least the conversation you have with David, I'm listening. And it's good to see the two of you have these conversations in a civil manner. And he's not the only person who has ever said that to me. Someone from the right. And so, maybe he is watching Newsmax. I don't know. But if he's also watching PBS NewsHour, that means he's open. And that's all I can ask of any viewer, any reader. Jim?
We are going to ask people to line up here if you want your book signed, and then we will call you up, and Jonathan will sign them here at this desk. And then I'm going to ask you to just continue going down and go down the steps on the other side.
And thank you all again very much for coming out and being here tonight.